Happy politics, and welcome to another jam-packed edition of BC Poly Hot Stove. The only thing that's more packed than the number of topics we're going to talk about today is the deficit, and we will get to that. Before we do that, my name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, joining you live from the Rockpile, the legislature in beautiful, sunny Victoria. And I'm joined in a socially distant manner by...
I'm Jordan Bateman. I'm Vice President Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, the mighty ICBA, here in Metrotown, Burnaby, British Columbia, where, Maclean, we survived a internet outage this morning, which you don't realize how important the internet has become to modern business and communications until you don't have it. And in the classic, you know when the power goes out and you still go into the bathroom and hit the light switch even though you know the power is out?
Yep.
I literally closed my web browser because it wasn't working because there was no internet, and then reopened it thinking, oh, I got to check Twitter. So that was not a great start to the morning, but we are back. We are internet strong, and yes, thank you for adjusting your schedule to compensate.
Yeah. Well, the fact that I can see you right now is probably a good sign that that's coming. So that's good. That's working. Hey, I teased it off the top with a horrible joke, as is our way. But obviously, the big news this week, we weren't expecting anything other than a large deficit. Right, but $12.5 billion is, I mean, it's huge. It's vast. Yeah. It's a little frightening.
It's staggering. To put this into context, largest ever. It's about, the BC government spends about $55 billion a year in a normal year. So that's a big chunk of that. I think most analysts, including myself, were expecting them to come in right around the $10 billion mark. Mm-hmm. You might say, well, $12.5 billion doesn't seem like a whole lot more than 10. Well, it's 25% more, and it's a lot. It's a lot. And this comes, unfortunately, on the heels of British Columbia, after years and years of surplus budgets, paying down the operating debt, and boom, just like that, we're $12.5 billion back in the hole. So not good news. Maclean, I printed off Carol James's slide from the fiscal snapshot, and it's unbelievable the hit to revenue. So, yeah. $1 billion less personal income tax, $1 billion less corporate income tax, $250 million less in employer health tax, $1.3 billion less in provincial sales tax, $500 million less in property transfer tax, $350 million less in carbon and fuel tax. It's like it just goes on and on. The Crown Corps looks like they're all headed into red ink, $1 billion less, maybe not red ink, but $1 billion less profit than they expected. It's bananas. $6.3 billion less in revenue, just off the top. These are numbers that, even in the 2008 recession, the 90s recession, the 80s recession, no one saw numbers like this, and it's crazy to see them on a slide from the provincial government, put out in this kind of matter-of-fact way. Like, yikes! It's not an enviable task.
The slide was matter-of-fact, and Minister James was fairly matter-of-fact when she actually delivered her update yesterday. The government news release was a little more vague. It talked about making investments and all the good things the government's doing, which is fair, but I mean, come on. Yeah. The headline is $12.5 billion. Yes. There's no hiding from that number. I mean, I think they would have known going in that, yes, that is the thing that's going to make everyone's eyes water.
Yeah, look, Les Lane was kind of the first one to point this out, the news release, probably because he was the first one to read the news release. And, the deficit number was buried in paragraph 5 or 6. And look, I get government comms people are generally writers who hate numbers, so that's number one. Number two, they are predispositioned to always find the sunny ways in every announcement. Having written a few news releases, I know they go problem, solution, benefit. That's how you write a news release. The problem here is there is no solution, and the benefit was the first 4 paragraphs of this release. It was really bad comms, bad spin. Certainly not reflective of Carol James's comments, but
no.
Yeah, it's a lot. The number in here that I'm a little questionable on is, they talk about they've talked about this $5 billion spending plan to help get the economy, recover the economy. We've seen hardly any of that up till now. I guess this is all part of their big public consultation. It does show how poor the recovery planning has gone from a government point of view. Like, I get that, especially during the height of the pandemic, all the resources were focused on just surviving that. But there were other ministers who could have been putting together an economic recovery plan. They are behind on that. $5 billion in relief coming for industry and employers. I don't know. We haven't seen hardly any of it yet. So, I do wonder if that number may shrink as they kind of go forward, but we shall see.
You mentioned off the top that that it's not just a question of the government spending tons of money. It's the fact that the revenue is hit, I was going to say pothole, but it's more like a crater. And I was thinking about that because I was driving home yesterday and I was listening to some call-in radio, and the one caller just simply said, "I can't believe the government is spending $12.5 billion more than last year." I'm like, that's not what's happened. But I mean, they're spending more, obviously.
Right.
But if we're going to talk about economic recovery, this is actually a really good illustration of why they need the economy to get back up on its feet, for the private sector to get humming again, because they desperately need this revenue that's generated through everything from sales tax to corporate tax to all the levers that feed into government revenues. They've taken such a massive historic hit. I'm running out of words to describe it. That's what we're going to have to start talking about. Is for an economic recovery, it can't just be stimulus spending. That has its place. I'm not saying we have to stop doing it, but how are we going to get the economy back running again? You represent the private sector. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah. Well, first, just to build on your point, about half the $12.5 billion is loss of tax revenue. The other half is spending measures. So it's almost exactly 50-50, which is probably a number that Carol James is comfortable with.
Yeah.
Look, we can't go into a second lockdown. That's the message here. Like, we can't be California here and regress, because this will be absolutely devastating. Every day it seems like another store is closed, another restaurant's shutting its doors for good, another business is going belly up. Cartwright Jewelers in New Westminster, for example, 85 years they've been in business. Like, 85 years. Think of all of the financial crises they had to deal with through 85 years. Now they're out of business. It sounds like it's a partly retirement, partly COVID. But, you just can't lose these staples of BC retail and tourism and all these things. As I was driving in, CKNW was wringing its hands, or one of the unions was wringing its hands, because hotel workers at the Pan Pacific have been told that they're moving from basically being laid off to temporary on call. There's no guests. What else are they supposed to do? I'm not sure what you could possibly do in the tourism industry in order to save the day here. So, big challenges ahead. You're right about recovery. Like, some of it has to be infrastructure. Some of it has to be maximizing investment infrastructure. And this is where the government's constant refrain about these, pardon my language, bullshit community benefit agreements is so offensive, because you're overpaying on projects for your friends and insiders. 15% of the construction industry is in these, part of these building trades unions that just happen to give $2.5 million and a number of candidates and backroom boys to the NDP over the years. They get a contract where, they're paid, the worker gets the same whether they would be open shop or union. There's no difference anymore in benefits and wages. In fact, for high-end workers, the wages are lower in a union because it's tied to seniority, not to quality of work. But it's all the bureaucracy. It's the ICBC-like Crown Corp that has been formed in order to employ them. It's the fact that, businesses are pricing in risk because they know that they lose their employees to go work for the government. They don't work for, Jacob Brothers or Kiewit or any of these companies anymore. They work for the government. It's driving up the cost by between 20 and 30% on these community benefit agreement projects. And, that's 25 or 30% less you have to spend on other things. So there's a lot of rumors right now Couch and Hospital is going to be one of these union-only agreements. Well,
really?
That's great, I guess. Couch so Couch and Hospital gets that. But then Couch also needs a new elementary school and needs a new RCMP building, both of which could be funded by the cost overruns that are going to come on this hospital, just as a sweetheart deal to the unions. So you've got to maximize every dollar. You got to go back to the WAC Bennett playbook, where it's manage every dollar as if it's your own, as if it's precious, and that has got to be the model here, instead of just stroking checks to friends and insiders in order to solve it. Look, hey, John Horgan, you're riding high in the polls. Your approval rating is great. You think you've got this right where you want it. There should be no harm then in tweaking a little bit of your own support to make sure you're doing the right thing for all British Columbians. You apparently have a cushion. I don't believe it, but okay, let's say you do. Like, use some of that political capital to actually save taxpayers money, because you have fewer bidders, more risk, more expense on that infrastructure. So, you have those kind of problems. Look, the other thing is they got to be faster. How many years have we been waiting for the friggin' Patello Bridge? Like, when is that thing actually going to start? It's crazy. The Massey Bridge could be, 2/3 done. We're years away from it being reapproved by the BC NDPE. Like, these are big problems. They got to be faster. They've got to be smarter. They've got to cut red tape. They've got to find some tax incentives here that actually, look, there's a tax deferral cliff coming for this PST and employer health tax. Some of it, I think, has been priced into these fiscal update numbers. Some of it, I bet, hasn't. I don't know, Maclean. I just go back to February when we're sitting in that room.
Yep.
Carol James gives the budget, and someone asks the question, have you thought about this coronavirus, any effect on that? No, we haven't, that's not included in this budget. Well, it should have been at least a little bit. And, BC hasn't made a lot of mistakes on the healthcare side. I would say, not closing travel from the United States, letting planes land here for too long. Like, those were a couple of the mistakes. The dental conference, we should have shut those things down. One mistake that the NDP certainly have made is they were not fiscally prepared for this, even a little bit.
Well, I wasn't, there was a controversial tweet from the former premier saying, it's a shame. This is why you save for a rainy day, because eventually it rains.
Yeah.
And she was angrily hand waved away by the people you would expect. But the point is fair. There is a school of thought, I know, in both Victoria and Ottawa, the two governments there, is what I mean, in that now that the deficit has grown so large as to be basically incomprehensible, that they've reached a who cares moment. Well, let's just keep spending. If we can't balance the budget, so why try? Let's just make it rain. And I understand where that argument is coming from, but there is no denying that eventually the bill's going to come due. And if it's not, it's not going to be. I think it was Les Lane, his column today, saying it's going to take decades to pay off the debt from this year alone. If we have to do this again, this is already something that, our kids are going to have to deal with. And my kid's young.
Yeah. And, like next year's projections, I've been working through the Conference Board of Canada and Business Council of British Columbia and all of the kind of groups that work on what next year could look like. And they're only seeing maybe a 50, maybe a 60% bounce back. Yeah. We're not getting back to those 2018 levels anytime soon, 2019 levels. Like, this is concerning. There's hope for the Hail Mary of the vaccine so that you could start tourism again, but I don't think you're going to have proper tourism until there is that vaccine. Like, no, I can't imagine if Dr. Henry is wringing her hands over 20 cases over, on a day. Like, I can't see that border ever opening until there's a vaccine. I love Dr. Henry, by the way, but this nonsense that 20 cases is too many a day is crazy when you've got 14 people in the hospital. Like, come on, like, I'm not saying we have to open up and be like Las Vegas or Orlando or Texas or California, but we all expected this the diagnosis numbers.
I get why she says it. She doesn't want people to think, well, great, whatever, 20. She's fine with 20 cases. Like, I understand why she's saying it, but I agree with you that we can't be hand wringing over 20 cases when we know. This is what they said. This is phase 3, and 20 cases in a province this size. Again, it's not great if you're one of those 20 cases, but no, we're
and they're almost all tied to long-term care or that one weird Kelowna party where clearly they were crazy or something. But although, so I've been rewatching Battlestar Galactica in my downtime. And you know how the running premise there was like anyone could be a Cylon and there's a secret Cylon? I had a nightmare the other night that I was a Cylon super spreader. And and I was going about my daily business and didn't realize I was spreading the COVID to everyone, right? Like, this is the paranoia that now is setting in. That's when I thought maybe I'll just give Battlestar a break for a couple nights just to let my brain reset. But yeah, so recovery, there is the infrastructure side, but man, they've got to start building some sort of incentive for employers to bring employees back on. As numbers stay fairly steady. By the way, stupidest headline of the week, stupidest tweet of the week, maybe the month, was CTV tweeting out that 20
Oh.
cases was a surge in cases. That is
Yeah.
journalistically irresponsible. I have lots of people who I love at CTV, great reporters there. Your social media person who did that is not doing you any favors. 20 cases is, a day for 5 days is not a surge in cases. Like, come on. That is fear-mongering and clickbait at the worst. But anyways, I digress. We need to find a way to get employees back to work. That is the number one key. You got to find a way for businesses to bring in enough revenue and keep enough revenue in order to employ those people. I think most businesses are like, look, if I can even just stay afloat during this time, like, no one's saying, oh, I want to make massive profits and like I'm going to get rich off COVID. No, they're just trying to find ways to bring their staff back. So we've got to be creative. We've got to figure out ways to let them flourish. That's why Unspun just goes crazy over the parks board not allowing drinking and picnics in their parks. That it's every little bit helps. Everything we can do to help, especially the restaurateurs, the tourist industry. And then in the fall, we've got to find a way to get schools open because there has got to be childcare for parents to go back to work, especially for women in the workforce. And I know, there was a controversial tweet, this affects women. All of the studies show, all the economic analysis shows, women are bearing the brunt. Women and the young are bearing the brunt of this pandemic. And we've got to figure out a way to reverse that. And one of that is to make sure schools are open. So I don't care if teachers, like I've thought about heard an idea out of the States, like what if you hired 19, 20-year-olds to kind of watch the classroom and then you had the teachers zoom in. So teachers teaching on Zoom and all the kids are in the class and you've got young university students who are furloughed anyways actually kind of doing that. Would that work?
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, can you imagine the teachers union signing off on that? No way. But anyways.
Well, it won't happen, but yes.
But let's find ways we've got to get kids in school and that has to be the starting point because just from a childcare perspective, the economy cannot pull itself up off the mat until we get there.
I don't want to dwell on this, but you mentioned the tweet yesterday about women being disproportionately affected by schools not reopening. It was an example of politics at its worst, where we're against whatever the other guys say. And so BC Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson said, and I don't have it verbatim in front of me, but essentially that if schools don't reopen, it disproportionately affects women. And that women, in fact, have been more likely to lose their jobs through this pandemic than men by quite a bit, actually. And he was panned for that by the NDP. And then Carol James repeated it pretty close to verbatim, like 15 minutes later.
Yeah.
They were both right, is what I'm saying here. It has disproportionately affected women. And you can argue that it shouldn't have. And that's a valid argument. But that is not what has happened.
No. Look, Wilkinson has daughters who are young working age. Like he's probably seeing it firsthand. I don't know the family situation, but I bet you he's seeing it firsthand. Like this is affecting them. Look, my wife is fortunate she has a job with a social services agency where she can work from home, but she bore the brunt of the especially with the 10-year-old all the homeschooling stuff. I do think that there's entrepreneurial people. Like I've been kicking around. Okay, if there is no school in the fall, do we find someone in the neighborhood who's willing to teach our 10-year-old, his best friend and his other best friend, and we have like a little private school go somewhere? Like, would that work? Sort of defeats the purpose of keeping everyone bubbled up as much as possible, but at some point, you've got to let other people into your bubble. That's one option. If I were a stay-at-home parent and I was going to have to do this anyways, I would switch kids out of the schools they're in and into the homeschooling program. I mean, if I've got to invest the time, I'd rather do the homeschooling program, which is decades of evidence that works, rather than this fly by the seat of your pants stuff that the teachers are putting out. And God bless the teachers, I know they're trying, but they were not trained or equipped for this.
No, of course not.
So I mean, how many times can your kid make cookies a week, like as a like measuring project, right? Like
not enough.
Yeah, apparently a few too many times for me. But we've just got to start thinking outside the box. So I know Rob Fleming is hoping, that's the education minister, is hoping by the end of July, I think, or very early August, to have sort of a plan set out. My sense is if it doesn't involve school 4 or 5 days a week for kids, you're going to see a lot of parents flee the system.
Yeah, well, they won't have much choice. Because you're right. I mean, it's either that or lose their jobs. It's a terrible situation to be put in.
It's not great. It's not great for sure. So But don't worry, I'm sure the NDP survey will come forward with all sorts of recovery ideas that will solve everything because, the ministers who should be thinking about this 24/7 for the past 4 months have clearly dropped the ball.
Something else I want to ask you about.
Wait, before we leave that, did we
Yes.
talk about the tourism? Last week, Lisa Bear in the House got kicked around, Minister of Tourism, because, there are no tourist jobs anymore. And then, she rushed out. There was suddenly magically appeared from the Tourism Industry Association of BC this letter, saying, oh, no, you're doing a fine job. I just want to say, I felt like the BC Liberals missed the obvious communication strategy here. Like, they jumped on it and were like, oh, it's sad the minister has to, push this letter out in order to get, validation. No, if you actually read the letter, the two ideas tourism industry actually endorsed were two ideas brought forward by Andrew Wilkinson, the BC Liberals. And essentially the letter said, Dear Lisa Bear, please continue listening. Thank you for these great programs. And if you read between the lines, it should be like, please keep listening to the opposition. Sincerely, tourism heart emoji, right? Like, that should have been sort of the way that BC Liberals went. I feel like they kind of missed an opportunity there, right? Like, oh, great. So, Lisa, if you want more of these positive letters, follow more of our ideas. You can find them at bcliberal.com/recovery or whatever.
Well, and it was a bit silly, I guess, in the beginning that you're right. I mean, the expectation that the industry association would send a letter saying, "Yeah, you're right. We think you suck." I mean, of course that's not going to happen. That's not professional. It's also, frankly, when they're relying on funding these days, kind of suicidal. But yeah, I did want to ask you about something that's completely different. And I'm speaking about doing things in a new way. You hosted a very interesting and unique, actually, debate. And frankly, I want to hear how that went.
Yeah, so the 42 federal electoral district associations in the Conservative Party of Canada in British Columbia, so from the entire province, got together and invited the 4 candidates to be on a Zoom debate. This was last week, last Wednesday, and only 3 accept the invitation. Peter MacKay got a case of front-runner-itis and sat it out. But Aaron O'Toole, Dr. Leslyn Lewis, and Derek Sloan were on Zoom, live for 2 hours, answering questions written by the British Columbia EDAs. I was asked to moderate it. I had a great time. The candidates were definitely well prepared. It's a little hard, Maclean, because of course, I eat, live, and breathe BC politics, and so they're all from Ontario. Their answers were naturally, look, they've been focused on federal politics, surface level British Columbia stuff, and I could have really, dug into a little bit more. If I wanted to Candy Crawley the debate, I could have really get in there and kind of stick the knife in them a few times. But, by and large, they were trying their best, trying to. Look, they were there, listening to British Columbian concerns. The questions weren't the typical questions they get. It was, hey, we were on doorsteps knocking doors last time on the Kill the Carbon Tax platform that, Scheer ran on federally. But, everyone knows that BC's had a carbon tax for 15 years and it's not going anywhere. Even if you kill that carbon tax, how does that affect us? So what's your plan for the climate? They asked about the coast. Are we doing enough for the coast as far as promoting it as a tourism destination, but also protecting it from oil spills, things like that. They asked about forestry, an honest to God forestry question, right? The forest industry is reeling. It's on its knees. It was on its knees before COVID, and now it's even worse. What do we say to forest-dependent communities? How do we bring them in? Asked about South Asian racism, racism against Chinese people. How do we take a strong stand against the Communist Party of China while still bringing Chinese Canadians into our voting coalition? So smart, intelligent questions. Sometimes they wandered off into tangents. I did my best to bring them back in. Now, I was on Zoom, so all I could see was the 4 of us. I understand the chat, so the Zoom link got shared widely. Conservatives, being a party of free speech, had an open chat. However, it got bombarded with some pretty racist comments by a couple of trolls who were immediately booted out, and then eventually the chat had to be shut down. And that was a shame because, the MacKay people were like, but you couldn't control it. If they have to do it again, they probably wouldn't have a chat, which is unfortunate. But the numbers were kind of crazy, Maclean. We had 1,500 people watch it live on Zoom. There's been another
Really?
few thousand views on YouTube, both live and after. And then, of all people, which tells you what they're struggling for content, the Rebel Media guys picked it up and simulcast it live, and it's had like 30,000 views over there. And CPAC, the Canadian Parliamentary Channel, aired it 3 times yesterday.
Oh,
So-
wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's
so-
actually quite a coup.
Yes, and there you go. I made CPAC, so there you are, finally. So the feedback's been great. The candidates were well prepared. It certainly helped me as I was filling out my ballot. I'm a CPC member, and I was genuinely undecided going in. It shaped how I filled out my ballot. And yeah, it was a good experience. It was weird. You know, you feel uncomfortable as a Canadian interrupting people, right? Like, Dr. Lewis, you're at 65 seconds, I got to stop you.
Yeah.
But they generally tried to stick to the time constraints. And let's just say in that crowd too, any joke you make about Justin Trudeau goes over very well. So I had a few Trudeau quips for the crowd.
That's good. Glad the Prime Minister could help you out in your time of need.
Yes, I appreciated it greatly.
One last topic I want to talk about before I let you go. It's not exactly a new topic, but it came up again lately, and it's one that I don't think gets enough attention. It's housing.
Right.
Right? It's
Yeah, you had a
first
good
of all, I think there's wide agreement that, government aside, there's no solution to housing in this province that does not also include building a lot more units. Mm-hmm. And in the 2017 election, the NDP, to their credit, identified this as a huge topic, made it a big part of their election platform, and they promised, I'm going to get this wrong, is it 10,400 or was it 14,000? I can't remember.
They promised 114,000 new units.
Excuse me, yes, 114,000. I knew that. I misspoke.
No worries.
I blame just being at the dentist. Over 10 years.
Yes.
So basically what I said every year for 10 years. Obviously, you wouldn't expect them to be, there are 3 years in, you wouldn't expect them to be 30% done because construction takes time, but we're not anywhere near 30% done. We're actually nowhere near 10% done. They've built, I think it's I can't remember, a couple thousand units.
How dare you, Maclean? They have cut the ribbon on many Rich Coleman projects in this
Well,
past
that was the
year.
other thing I was going to say is a lot of the units that have been completed were previously announced and funded by a previous government, as you might expect for housing projects, which take a long time to build.
Yeah.
Hey, this is where I came down on this. Ribbon cutting is one of the privileges of government. I get that. That's fine. But the building isn't happening. It's not happening fast enough.
No.
And yet...
The funding's not happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So some of the, if you dig into the numbers, they'll talk about units that have been initiated. But initiated means everything from, yes, there's funding attached, to no land, no funding, just an announcement that it's going to happen at some point in the future. And this is counting as initiated. That's crazy.
Yeah. No, you're right. Nothing pleases me more as a construction association comms/marketing person than hearing a government complain about another government's red tape. I thoroughly enjoy it. I applaud it. And the NDP government, if you want to get this housing going, you're gonna have to force municipalities like the City of Vancouver to cut the red tape around development.
Yeah.
Our builders know it. They're constantly plagued by it. It drives up costs. It drives up timelines. It's ridiculous. It provides little or no value to the end consumer, certainly not to the taxpayer. Now is the time to be leveraging and saying, look, you're desperate for development cost charges, for example, in the City of Vancouver. You're desperate for revenue. Cut your red tape so we can get more housing going there. That's the way out of this mess, right? But they won't do it because provincial governments, by and large, are terrified of mayors and don't want to get into a fight with a local mayor, even though most local mayors are atrocious and should be fought with religiously. Just as a matter of fact, you can't picture the NDP having a pillow fight with Kennedy Stewart, a former NDP MP, and by definition then a member of the BC NDP party. But this is the problem. It's partly a funding issue. They're not putting the resources into it that they should. But it is also very much a red tape issue. And again, there's one way to solve that, and that's to force municipalities to cut red tape.
Can you do that? Is that something that can be done with, obviously Vancouver's separate, it's got its own charter.
Municipalities are a creation of the provincial government. Municipalities get leaned on by the provincial government all the time on certain processes around, agriculture or whatever, kind of pet projects they have. If this was really a political priority for the BC NDP, they would put they'd flex some muscle behind it. And They're not. And what surprises me is even in places where the red tape isn't terribly bad, they're not taking advantage of that. Like, okay, change it. Say, all right, where's the low-hanging fruit? We know Brad West will like open up Port Coquitlam to pretty much anything at this point in order to bring revenue in. Go to Port Coquitlam, go to Langley City, like there are places where you can build, but instead, it's partly a mix of need, partly a mix of people. This is a terrible story, but we once were talking to a family who were looking for a place to live, and they felt like it was their God-given right to live in Kitsilano. And I said, it is only Jody Vance's God-given right to live in Kitsilano.
And no one else.
No, I'm just kidding. It's not the rest of us. But, they just feel like, no, well, what do you mean I can't live in Kitsilano? Well, your family income is $75,000 a year. Like, there is not that possibility. Like, you got to make choices, sacrifices, and that's the way it goes. But BC Housing tries to build in these places, generally close to transit, which makes sense. But then that does limit your options as far as other things go. So, if I were BC Housing, I'd be looking at every TransLink property, every park and ride. Can I build on the fringes of that? Can I cut a deal with TransLink to build them stacked parking and have take part of their footprint for buildings?
That kind of arrangement, I'm shocked we don't see more of because it just makes too much sense.
Well, exactly. In fact, when back in the day when I was, I think, still on council or just coming off of Langley Township Council, the Carville's Park and Ride was being built or approved. And one of the things that I pushed Rich Coleman to do, who was the MLA and the cabinet minister at the time, was like, hey, it's great that this is being built. Carve off some of this land for future housing, BC Housing. Like, you don't even have to build. The great thing is most people park at night. You don't even have to build a parkade for the BC Housing project. They could park in the park and ride at night, and they don't, use transit. The ones who could use transit, you could even, have some shared amenities with the park and ride station. Like, you could do something pretty cool. There is land there, but nothing's been built on it. And you just think, what a wasted opportunity for, the way to affordability is multiple. Cutting down transportation costs is another way of contributing to that. So housing is going to be a problem forever. I also, bluntly, I don't think much of Selena Robinson as a minister on this file. Her latest comment that, supportive housing, is supposed to have someone there 24/7. But it turns out it's just someone to have a cup of tea with. I found very patronizing and minimized the opioid crisis and other issues.
That one got more attention, and you're right. I'm not disputing it, but the line that I think may come back to haunt them more was in reference to a growing crime wave and saying, "Well, that's just people making phone calls."
That's like Trump saying. That's like Trump saying, "Oh, our numbers are high because we're testing more."
Yeah.
Oh, the crime is higher because people are
exactly.
phoning.
It actually is very similar.
Yeah.
We're going through something very similar right now in Victoria with Beacon Hill Park, where today the police just announced they raided a chop shop in one of the environmentally sensitive areas. The whole city has known this is there.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I heard it on Adam Sterling's show.
Well, yeah, there's that. But the problem is that whatever her other strengths, Lisa Helps has been saying, in fact, urged people to not take pictures in Beacon Hill Park. Do not gather evidence that this is happening. It was very much we don't want to know. We don't want to know. Please stop driving attention to this. That hasn't happened. There is raised crime around there. There's been assaults and that, and I'm not going to make light of any of it. But the chop shop is a little funnier, and but the problem is that they can't have it both ways. They can't just sort of say, well, we're doing this, and they've declared victory and it's over, and then everything that happens after it has nothing to do with us. I think Selena Robinson and the NDP are going to. They're going to have to face up to this at some point. The story this week of, again, another Victoria story, and I apologize, but an organic bakery is turning against them because they bought the hotel that they have been that they leased the restaurant out of and spent $100,000 to renovate. It's delicious, by the way. I hope it survives, but no one will go anywhere near it now because it's a shelter. And I'm sorry if that sounds difficult, but. Yeah. That is the reality. Not coincidentally, it's the same property that police just recovered an AR-15 from.
Oh, wow. Come for the croissants, stay for the gunning. Is this different than Joe's Diner? Is it Joe's Diner?
Paul's
Diner, pardon me.
And it's the same place, yeah.
Crazy. It's crazy. This is a problem when you rush policy. The Howard Johnson purchase as well, downtown Vancouver, has really changed that neighborhood. And like the cost per unit was astronomical. And you think to yourself, like, did it have to be in downtown Vancouver? Could we not have put it somewhere else along the transit line in order to make things work? But this comes back to people's God-given right to live in certain communities, or the sense that there is some sort of right to that, rather than reality.
And the thing I want to leave on that is because every time you bring up something like this, you get accused of, well, you don't care about the homeless. That's not it at all.
No.
These people do deserve a home. They deserve the supports that some of them clearly need. And no one is suggesting that we should just sweep them aside and forget about them.
Yeah.
But when you create a solution that is not actually helping, it is actually making people less safe, and it is causing problems which you then deny and then get angry for people for even noticing, that doesn't help either. And in fact, I would argue makes it more difficult to reach better solutions in the future because people stop listening to you. They stop believing you. We have run into that headfirst here in Victoria, and I know that's happening in Vancouver as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Wait, I'll tell you a funny story. So when I was 13, went to church in Langley, and somehow 4 of us got tapped to go down every day for a week and work with the folks at Union Gospel Mission. So this would have been in 1989, 1990, summer 1990 maybe. So 13-year-old Jordan, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 16-year-old. So the 4 of us are down there every day, and we're making sandwiches, and they would have a little church service before the folks could eat. And then they would send us out with their street teams. And now in Maclean, I just sit and think, it was, downtown East Side was bad then, but it was 1990.
Yeah.
30 years later, nothing's gotten better. And God bless those folks at Union Gospel Mission. They've stuck in there. They work. They're the preeminent. They're a model for what service and it should be. But nothing's gotten better in that neighborhood. I would not send my 13-year-old daughter or my 17-year-old down there to work a week. You just would. It's completely different, and it just seems to worsen year after year after year after year. And I think now the Parks Board, and this will probably be the topic of Unspun, are going to allow people to park in camps just overnight. But we know those tents aren't going anywhere. By the way, Maclean, question. What is the mailing address for Unspun? Because I have a cease and desist letter I need to send to Jody and George, because they clearly infringing on my Orca ranting on
That's
podcast shtick. So I need to make sure.
Gimmick infringement.
Yeah, infringement, copy gimmick infringement, you're right. So I need to get this out to them. So if you don't mind offline, just sending me their mailing address, because I will need to have my lawyers look into that. Their Unspun was legendary. If you haven't listened to Unspun from last week, go back and listen to it. Some legendary rants by Jody and Underscore that I agreed with every word of. And it was like old-time church service for me, walking around the house listening to it on my podcast feed, amen, yeah, preach it, brother, keep going. They were all over the Parks Board for some goofy decisions, and I think they're coming to the realization that every sane human being has in Vancouver at some point, Greater Vancouver. We don't need a Parks Board, just get rid of them. It's unfixable. Some systems are unfixable. I believe the Parks Board is one of them.
And what you're saying is, of course, you're the road warriors and they're demolition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Crush.
There's 5
They're
people.
the crush demolition.
Get that joke? That's right.
Yeah.
5 people watching and listening got that joke.
They're not even axe and smash. They're crush. That's how bad they are. That's how much they're infringing.
Does that make you Mean Gene? I could possibly top that reference.
Does that make you Mean Gene? Mean Gene? Is that who you are?
I'll take Mean Gene. I like to think of myself as more Bobby the Brain, but I'll take Mean Gene.
I wish I had a little creamer here, because the cream always rises to the top.
I have that T-shirt.
It's the best. I wish Macho Man was still around, because
I do too. I mean, we could use some of his wisdom. Favorite. I think now more than ever.
My all-time favorite, Macho Man, Randy Savage. Man, he could bring on the mic, he could bring in the ring.
Could. And he, like you said, the cream always does rise to the top. And so will this podcast. I am at Maclean K. He is at Jordan Bateman. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and of course on the mothership at theorca.ca. And until next time, happy politics.